Hi, I'm Orly Grouper. I'm the founder of Women in Mobility, which was created in order to grow the number of women in the field. And this is why I'm super excited to launch today the first of a series of Becoming a WIM. Becoming a WIM is going to be a series of interviews interviewing different women on their career paths in mobility and maybe help you get inspired to join the field as well. Today we're going to have with us a young female entrepreneur which just sold her company to a big name out there in the mobility field for a $3-digit million deal. So stay tuned and we'll start soon. So excited today for our first Becoming a WIM interview. Today we have with us Tiffany Chu, which is the co-founder and CEO of Remix, and now SVP of VIA, as she just sold her company to VIA, one of the greatest mobility company out there. Thank you so much for coming here and for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Orly, for inviting me, for having me here. It's been great to explore Tel Aviv and be in Israel for the first time.
Yeah, I always say that Israel, sometimes it takes some people time to get here, but once they do, they keep coming back. So I'm sure I'm going to see more of it.
Yes, there's more of this in the future.
So I'm actually just going to jump right into it. We're doing this whole series on becoming a WIM, becoming a woman in mobility. And I feel like mobility has been your passion your whole life. Can you share with us your path in this mobility journey, like where you started and what happened along the way, professionally more, and like how is that journey for you?
So I guess if you talk about my professional life, I found mobility through studying urban planning and architecture.
Yes.
I think I've always been very passionate about the built environment and how that shapes human life.
How we move around cities and
Yes.
how we live in them.
Exactly. And the way that we design our built environment to get from one place to another is a really big part of it. So one of my first jobs out of school was actually at Zipcar, the famous car sharing company. Started in Cambridge, in Boston, where I was living at the time. And I got to be their first user experience designer and researcher, which meant I thought I had the coolest job. I got to ride along with Zipcar members, which we called Zipsters, everywhere in different cities to understand what they wanted, how we could improve the service,
How they're using
it, what are the use cases, how do we expand and make it better. Anyways, it was one of my favorite jobs, and then ended up joining a nonprofit, doing a fellowship in the public sector with Code for America. And then Remix actually emerged out of a side project, a hackathon project, while at Code for America for residents. We developed a prototype to help residents of San Francisco suggest better transit routes to the city.
So citizens suggesting to municipalities their needs.
Yes, and it was more for us and our friends. We wanted a route that went from our house to Golden Gate Park, and there was no route. How do we tell the city that would be an awesome idea? Why not map it out and send it to them? And so that was the original idea. And then it just snowballed. The app that we built, which was called transitmix.net very early on, it went viral on Twitter in 2014. And after our Code for America fellowship, we wanted to just follow it to see how far it went. And 7 years later, we sold Remix to VIA, and that's why I'm sitting here today.
Well, I feel like even before VIA, I would totally invite you because many women in mobility, they're coming from different aspects, and it's like it's in your blood, this yearning of supporting humans and moving around, basically.
Yeah, I would say, I think one of my favorite conversation topics whenever you meet me for coffee or lunch, I'm always going to ask, so how did you get here? And then, all the small decisions you make, deciding if you walk or if you got to the bus stop too late and then you decide to take a bike share, all those different small human behavioral choices, I think, is one of the most fascinating things.
You
that
got here by train today.
I did get here by train, by walking. It was an adventure.
Yeah, in a new city,
Yeah.
which is even more north of Tel Aviv. So
Yeah.
coping with all of that, I think, is it's somewhat brave sometimes, right? You need to be like a little brave to take that leap of faith in public transportation, especially when you're not a local human.
Yeah, I actually sometimes think public transit should be less scary, if at all possible. And so obviously, you know, when I got to Tel Aviv, I asked all my colleagues at VIA, like, what apps should I download, how to get from here to here. And every single time you do something for the first time, you have to be a little bit brave. But then after that, hopefully it becomes a part of human nature.
Yeah, I feel like we're an app generation. It's not about, you know, how we're getting places. It's about how I can just download an app and just have whatever it is. Like, I don't really care about the vehicle, just as long as it picks me up where I am and I can get to where I'm going.
Yeah, what's the best user experience for getting me from point A to point B, and what am I going to be most enjoying during that time, whether it's like seeing a new neighborhood or watching other people in the same shuttle that I'm in or bubble or anything. All of that is part of, you know, a new experience in a new city.
So take me back a little bit. I'm most interested about the human behind the woman in the mobility. And I was wondering if you can share with us how you grew up and if you feel that growing up you got any tools that made you fall in love with the field.
Okay, so stepping all the way back,
Yeah.
I was born in Flushing in New York, in Queens, and my parents emigrated from Taiwan to New York and settled in a very immigrant-heavy area, part of New York. And I think that was actually a really important part of me growing up, was watching my parents navigate a completely foreign country and, you know, not native English speakers and needing to facilitate a new life. So we actually moved from Flushing to suburban New Jersey when I was pretty little, and a lot of that change was, I remember, very formative for me, because we moved from very transit-rich environment where you could literally walk outside, get on the subway, get on the bus, you know, go to the grocery store by walking, and then all of a sudden we were in very deep, almost even outside of suburbia, like exurbia, where, you know, a lot of the
Mobility Island.
Yes, like we moved to a townhouse and moved to a cul-de-sac, and it was, I think, in my parents' mind, and I understand why they felt that way, they wanted to move up in the American dream. So you like live in a tiny apartment in the city, and then you make a little bit more money, you like have a more stable job, and then you get to move to the suburbs, and a townhouse is, you know, your next step, and then finally you get a single family home with, you know, a lawn and maybe a fence and, you know, definitely a driveway for, you know, your car, because that is a car.
The American dream.
Synonymous with the American dream.
Yeah, big car.
There's no way you can live the American dream without a car. So, yeah, and it was very interesting for me to grow up in a cul-de-sac with, you know, very conservative family and background, and it was very difficult for me as a kid and then as a teenager and, you know, growing up in that environment to really get around. You couldn't get to school unless you were on the school bus, you know, which we had to like walk to the school bus stop, not a big deal, but if we wanted to go hang out with friends, or even like me going to work my first job at the mall, like you had to have a car in order to do anything in life, even go to the grocery store, like you couldn't walk anywhere. And it was so interesting for me to realize that that was my parents' definition of the American dream, whereas I, obviously as like a teenager, felt really trapped. I feel like I couldn't go anywhere, I had no freedom. And then I went to school in Boston, in Cambridge, went to MIT, where, you know, we're right on the Red Line in Boston. You could take the #1 bus from Cambridge to Boston across the Harvard Bridge. And my mind just like exploded. Like you can literally go anywhere in the city. Also, it's very walkable. And then I got my first bike. I got it stolen, and it was the whole thing. But I was so excited because there were just so many options to get around that I never experienced before. And I was like, wow, this is a whole new world, and I want to study it. I want to study urban planning.
I guess mobility gives like an independence, right?
Yes, it's basically the freedom to live your best life.
And do what you want at that time. And not have it being dependent on anything or anyone bringing you or getting you there. Once it's yours to take ownership on, then you can kind of empower yourself and start doing things.
Yes, and then you can see that play out in so many aspects of society. It's like in the US, I don't know if it's the same for in Israel, but the zip code you're born into is the single largest definer of your future economic mobility if you're born over here versus over here. And so transportation becomes a way to get out and also a way to seize and capture opportunity that you probably would have not been able to otherwise if you just stayed in the zip code or the neighborhood where you grew up.
Well, in Israel, you're actually tagged by where you were born when you get to the army. You're probably also given a lot of opportunities according to where you grow up, right? But when you get to the army, you have all these numbers that are grading you. And one of the things is where you grew up and what is your socioeconomic situation. And that also defines the human that you are and the opportunities that are going to be presented to you.
Wow. Wait, so how does that actually play out? So you get a tag and then people know
according to that and according to how well you do on exams and all according to your physical health. So all these come into numbers. And then according to those numbers, you're offered positions in the army.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's like numbers directly correlating to your
zip code.
future job and your zip code. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and your zip code also is, where you grew up is how much the municipality has money to invest in infrastructure and in transportation. So it's a lot of that. But I feel like today transportation is prioritized, not only because of climate change and that whole thing, it's really understood that I feel like we're all kind of growing into this big pile of cars and traffic, and everything is just stuck. So there is a shift. But tell me, do you feel like growing up with immigrant parents and growing up in these parts of the U.S., is there anything you received at home or at school, tools that made you a little bit brave? Because I feel like you dared a lot growing up and you took leap of faith in the past and in the present. And do you feel like there is anything that you received early on to take that?
I'm trying to think. I do remember when I was in high school, I was in a class, it was around U.S. history, and you were graded on participation. And so, growing up where English was not initially my first language, I learned Mandarin first growing up, and then English took over as I, became an American girl.
Yeah. I know exactly the feeling.
Yeah. Raising your hand to speak it up in class to me was much scarier than, studying many, many hours the night before and getting 100 on an exam. I knew if I studied really hard, I could get an A, and the effort that I put in to preparing for something, it would be equitable to the outcome. And so that was my whole philosophy and logic of how to be successful in school and thus in my mind in the world. And then I had this class in AP history where you were graded on how often you spoke up in class, and every single time you raised your hand and made a point, and the point that you made had to be different from every other person who had spoken earlier in the class, and the teacher would give you a point for every single time you said something that was insightful. And
your voice.
That class, I was so terrified of that class. I would be sweating before entering the classroom. I would write down notes ahead of time to make and verbalize and be able to voice all the smart things that I thought I could say because they were in my head, but it was just so hard for me to get it from my brain to my voice. And there was always, some other person in the class who I did not think studied as hard as me, but for some reason was way better at talking. And, they would get a much higher grade than I was. And I remember crying after class because I thought that the teacher just did not know that I was trying really hard and wouldn't call on me. Anyway, so it was like kind of traumatic for me. So one of the choices that you can take in my high school is you can like select an elective class. And I chose to sign up for this public speaking class because I knew I needed to get better at it. And I was like so nervous. And one of the first assignments was improvisational speaking, just impromptu. Like get up in the front of the class and talk for 2 minutes. Set the timer for 2 minutes and you just talk. You cannot not talk. You just have to talk.
Any topic?
Any topic. But you just have to blab for 2 minutes. And oh my gosh, it was so scary. But the one advice that I remember to this day from that teacher is that when you think about making a speech, you can think about it as a gift. And when you give somebody the gift of a speech or an anecdote or a story, if you can think about, you're not burdening anyone, you're actually giving them a gift of a new perspective that they might not have had before, that was eye-opening for me.
Thank you for that. It's a good gift and pearl to pass on.
Yeah.
When you're talking about this, like I'm hearing you, through this experience in your class, I'm thinking women in boardrooms. Right? So going around, all these people, and everyone giving a thought, and you want to say something. You don't want to repeat what was said already, although I feel like a lot of humans are very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Also repeating what you said in different ways.
Yep.
It's funny because I used to dance a lot and go a lot on stages dancing and performing. And then once I started going on stages and lecturing and using a voice, I found like this great new gift of a voice. And you have time on stage to share pearls. And I always try and, give a little bit of how I see the world while I'm talking about mobility and everything. But I feel like I hear you through your experiences, and I feel like this is a struggle that a lot of women are going through. If it's in boardrooms, if it's on stage. At Women in Mobility, we had a workshop on public speaking because of that, because I want to see more women on stage. And it's an issue.
Yeah, I think it's the merging like your confidence with authenticity that is, I think, probably the hardest part. And of course, I'm still improving at it. And I think about times when I've been on stage to say something and I was like, oh, that was like such a silly way of saying it. I should have said something else and, kick myself for it. But I think the more that you do it and the more that you're confident in yourself and the talents that you bring because of who you are, not necessarily because of your accomplishments or like anything specific, it's just more you're comfortable in your own skin, which I'm still improving.
We all are.
We all.
It's a life journey, right?
Yeah, I think that's when I feel most connected to another woman who's speaking on stage who feels comfortable in her own skin. She makes me feel comfortable, and I think that is like the relationship that you're able to bring with the confidence.
Yeah. And that's why we need more women on stage as well, to be able also to see that and say, hey, I can be there, if it's all, well, I don't want to categorize, right? But if it's all like white male there, then you don't feel like you can be a part of that discussion. But the more women we have on stage and the more diversity we see, then we feel that we can take a part as well.
Yeah, you feel that you belong there and you're not an interloper. And, I've definitely been at conferences, even a conference this week, wonderful conference. And they had one panel with 7 white men. And I was shocked. I was like, it's 2021. It's almost 2022.
Yeah.
And, we can do better.
We can. I can tell you that it's like being a person that did a lot of events. It's hard to find high-positioned, high-level women in the field. And a lot of times I had to talk to their bosses and upgrade their title in order to put them on stage. And funny thing is that they didn't keep the title afterwards. I'm not sure why. Like, I upgraded to like chief VP, and I don't know. They I I would fight for keeping that.
So you were helping women get promoted outside of their job, inside their job. That's very noble.
All about that. So I feel like I pat myself on the back because I managed to create and hold a relationship while doing this whole thing. And I'm looking forward into trying to understand how I'm supposed to juggle career, love, relationship, family. And I'm wondering, like, what are your thoughts about that? Have you had time since beginning of 2014 when you started Remix? Back then, unsexy name that you said before. Do you manage to have a private life?
Yeah, well, I guess I really try not to divide my life into professional and personal. I really believe in bringing your whole self to work, and if it's possible.
You work 24 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is
I do the part 24-hour work.
Yeah. It's part of it. And I think what I've noticed is that the more that, actually my colleagues know about who I am outside of work, like if they've met my partner or met my family or met my sister, and I find that they care more about me as a person. And when I meet their family and, their dog and their moms, I care about, or I understand them more holistically as a person. And I think that actually makes for a much more robust working relationship. I will say, I think for the first, 5, 6, 7 years of Remix, I had a pretty myopic life. It was just like, I woke up, breathed Remix for 14 hours a day, and came home and did more Remix, and then got up and did it all over again. And I think COVID made me and maybe you as well take a breath to realize, okay, well, maybe being on a plane every week was not always the most healthy thing, and you can try to have a little bit more balance. So I've been very, very thankful of the international pause that we've had. So I actually moved from San Francisco to Seattle with my partner. We moved with our dog, moved in with my partner's mom, who I love, and it is a more well-rounded life I think I have now than I did in San Francisco.
And it's new during COVID, or you started before?
It happened during COVID, and then obviously with the recent acquisition, I'm not the CEO anymore. And, it took me a while to grapple with that, just from an identity crisis, who am I? Do I still have value if I don't have the title? And, at the end of the day, I'm actually quite happy that I don't need to be CEO anymore.
Yeah, I feel like it's a matter of cycles, right? It's like you have cycles where you're more in high rhythm, and then cycles where you're like, okay, I like this.
Yeah.
I was just actually having this conversation with another woman in mobility this week on how COVID made us all kind of pause, and not pause, but find this new normal of, getting on calls, doing meetings, and then having lunch at home, and maybe organizing some stuff while we're doing that, and taking calls from our garden. And it was all magical, and now the world is kind of understanding this, how we're getting back to a new normal, but I feel like it's not really a new normal. We're back to this very high rhythm again. We didn't really learn anything. Do you feel like it's the same, or in the United States you're still...
I think it's definitely coming back where people have higher expectations around what it means to have balance in life, and the flexibility that now everybody absolutely expects as just a baseline for being at your job, and then expecting your job to allow you to do your job at any time that you want from wherever. I think that is a change that's going to be pretty fundamental. People will obviously still want to go into the office to have social connections with their colleagues and forge meaningful relationships and go to conferences and go to different countries and et cetera. I think it will just be more about overall balance. For me, I'm going to go to New York next week. It's going to be a hectic week. And then we're going to have Thanksgiving. And it's going to be a really lovely family-oriented week, and then I'm going to be back in Seattle. It's going to be like a quieter week, and then I'm going to fly somewhere again. It's going to be crazy. I think for me, what I have realized that I wanted is I want that variety, and I want that balance through the variety of, really intense, really high energy weeks, and then like other weeks where I can reflect a little bit more and decompress.
So being fully present in each moment of that cycle.
Yeah.
Weirdest moment of a woman in mobility?
Oh my gosh, I remember, I think it was one of my first years of, being a co-founder, and we had just hired like a head of sales, like a chief revenue officer, and we were going to a big, very traditional conference in the US called APTA, the American Public Transportation Association. It's like every general manager, every board member, every transit agency is there. And I remember going with him, and we were meeting partners and customers and et cetera. And without fail, I just remember like every single meeting where I was like, standing there with my colleague, my executive who I had hired, and like shaking everyone's hand, and everybody just like being confused about what my role was. Like they would have to either ask for my business card or like look really, really closely at my name tag to confirm that yes, I was actually the CEO, or yes, I was actually the co-founder, because there were quite a few times when, they would assume that I was the secretary, or I was the executive assistant, or I was the like, I don't know, intern or like young associate, being paired with, the senior executive, and then just like the look of surprise on their faces when they realized that I was actually the one in charge and the boss. That moment, that like split second of confusion, I will never forget, and I will always be able to suss it out.
Do you feel it improved? Do you think that something in you changed while introducing yourself to people? Like, because you're talking about very early on in the startup life.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that changed, or you became more like the face of the company and then people knew you more?
I think before I would get like really offended, and I would get like I would feel insecure.
You're more aware of it.
Yeah, I'm like a small Asian woman who like looks like she's like in her 20s and probably looked that way for a while.
Continue looking that way, it's working for you.
And I would just, always ask myself, like, is there anything I can do to make myself look older, make myself look like people will take me more seriously, do my hair differently or wear bigger earrings or something. And
like a mirror.
Yeah, okay. You feel this? Yeah.
I used to lie about my age early on. Like make myself older.
Yeah. Like put more like eyeliner on in different ways, whatever. And now I think I'm getting a little bit more comfortable in my skin. If people think I'm younger than I am, like, it's like starting to become a compliment. If they're surprised that I'm the CEO, it's like, oh, well, it just shows how ignorant you could be.
Yeah, so it's more about like the journey you're going through in confidence in yourself rather than society changing. Yeah,
maybe. It's more of how I place myself in the ecosystem and being more comfortable with that.
Yeah, I used to own a motorcycle company, and I was interviewing a new salesperson in the showroom, and I had a polo with the company logo on it, and the person coming in for an interview had regular clothes, and a random client walked in, and he asked him all the questions while I was wearing like company logo over here, and it was just like this surreal moment of wow, how far we're still from like the reality of percepting like what's going on.
Yeah, and you'll never forget that feeling, right? It's like becomes like ingrained in you of just how society expects you to be, or like who they define you as just by looking at you and making some, very rapid conclusion. And it takes some time to kind of like recover from that.
Yeah, and I feel like that's why this is what is interesting to me is like, what tools can we give young women to feel more comfortable in their own skin, to speak up more in boardrooms, to take a seat at the table, to kind of, if you're not given the space, then just take it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. One thing that I've tried to be fairly conscientious of in my organization and now in the context of a bigger company is to notice when there's an opportunity for someone to share or present or speak on behalf of the work that they've done or a project in like an all-hands meeting, maybe something as simple as like a weekly leadership meeting, and have the opportunity to highlight someone's work where, you could obviously invite, the senior executive who leads the team, but you could also invite, the individual contributor who's very up and coming, like more junior, and have them present. And I think those small details of just giving up and coming, very high potential colleagues of yours who are more likely to be women or women of color or people of color, I think that is just like a really small but really tactical and really pragmatic thing and tool that folks who are in more privileged positions of leadership should remember every week, every time they have a meeting, just call on somebody who maybe hasn't spoken before.
How many people do you have at Remix?
So at Remix, we were around 65, 70 when we were acquired.
And how many of them are women?
Gosh, I think I've always been very, very proud of the fact that we stayed close to 50-50, if not higher at some points. And I think part of that was because I was a female CEO.
So you were more attentive to it.
Yes, and then also people saw me in that position, and folks who were excited about that would want to apply. And so I think there's something about, the candidate pipeline reflecting the leadership that
Do you think that women are more prone to apply to women-led companies?
I think you feel maybe a higher level of kinship or connection to the leader as a result. And if you're if you're choosing voluntarily to follow someone for a couple years, you want them to be someone who you can relate to and you respect and you admire.
Yeah. So I love the percentages in your company, but what do you think about, us being 51% of the world, using all transport modes, all mobility modes, and being actual users of this vision and future that we're creating? But from where I am in the whole innovation technology world, we're about 20% of the people creating it. How do you think that we can grow that number?
I think one of the things that has been very inspiring for me, just even being here in Tel Aviv, to see the number of women who were on stage last night at the Prime Minister's gala, and the Minister of Transportation is a woman here in
It's
Israel.
very new, all of this.
Okay, I was very impressed. I was like, wow. And I think it's not just the leadership at the top obviously makes a big difference, but it's like every level down you want also that representation from, your VP level down to your, first level order of managers, because they're the ones who are supporting and choosing and recruiting every single person who's going to be working for them underneath them, and then hopefully elevating and raising them to the rest of the org. So I think this concept of allyship or being an advocate in the US, I don't know if it's the same terminology here in Israel, but I think it's very important to have, if I'm like a young woman coming up in a new company, like I want to have, multiple points of relationship and contact with other leaders in my company, not just my manager, but my manager's manager, and like this person over here and this person over there, and to make that more normal, whether it's mentorship or like having a buddy system at an organization. I think that's very, very important for really cultivating kind of that next level of talent and making sure that it's as diverse in all the different ways that we want to be successful. I think that has to be true not only in a very external facing way, like with the Prime Minister's cabinet and et cetera, but also in all of the supporting like vendor relationships. If I'm a local government agency and I have the ability to choose which vendor I want to work with, if I can for example, incentivize the companies that I choose to work with a big government contract to be and to value diversity. I think that's one small way that we can start to move the needle.
Yeah, I feel like it's starting now. I always say that, and also now is a great time to be a female entrepreneur. I feel like there's so many grants out there and so many, so much support for female entrepreneurs everywhere, not only in mobility, but also in different fields. Because there is such a gap and we need to kind of push that forward. I just feel like a lot of times it's like ambition and reality. Like we look for this future of a diversified boardroom, and yet when you see members of the board, it's not exactly that, or middle management, or higher up. So I feel like we still have such a long way to go. And I feel like what you said about mentorship is, it's actually true for all millennials and Gen Z, I guess, as well. Because we're not so great with hierarchy. We're more like looking for flat organizations and being able to talk to other humans and on a leveled, on a leveled way.
Yeah. I think that's one big thing I've learned as, the leader of an organization is the hunger that the rest of the organization has to see their CEO as human, as real, as someone who they can, have lunch next to. And, that's not every CEO style, but I think the more that you can connect with staff of every single level, I think the stronger your connective tissue in your company will be. And I think it goes a long way for making people feel included. Of course, you can invite someone to a meeting, but if you're not going to ask them what they think, you're not fully including them in their full potential.
And if you had a daughter, would you advise her to go into the mobility space?
I mean, I would definitely raise her in an environment where she could explore, she could use every single mode possible and she can make her own decision about what she wants to do in her career. But, I would open the door for her.
And what do you think would be the tools that she would need to have in order to grow, to be successful in this field?
I think one thing I've noticed being an Asian American and, having gone back to Taiwan and seen my family and, how gender is perceived in different cultures, I think there is this, in more conservative cultures where if you're a girl growing up, if you're very well behaved and very quiet and sitting up straight and just the well behavedness is so heavily incentivized. It's this is what you should be doing is you should behave, you should follow the rules, you should listen to the teacher, never talk when you're not supposed to. And all of these rules, once you get older, and let's say you're an entrepreneur, you will never be rewarded for being well behaved as an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, you just need to break the rules or else you're never going to get anything done. Nothing new is going to happen in the world. Yeah. And I think I don't even know how I would be as a parent, but somehow cultivating the right balance between, following some rules, but not all of them.
Yeah, kind of learning boundaries, but learning how to bend them sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, as an entrepreneur, you have to get shit done. And no one, if you don't do it, it doesn't get done.
Yeah, I feel like when you're an entrepreneur, you just have to run through walls. And the walls exist to keep people out. And if you're not able to, figure out how to get through that wall, you will just fail. And I think that's actually what happens to a lot of women is they're just so conditioned to be well behaved, to only raise their hand, and if someone reprimands them, they're and this happened to me too. If I get if I do something slightly wrong and someone tells me about it and gives me negative feedback, I'm oh my god,
it's a 24-hour beating.
Yeah, exactly. Where actually, being rewarded for being creative and kind of thinking outside the box is something that we, as a society, I think don't know how to reward enough in women.
And with men, yes.
Yes, with men, of course, yes.
Of course, yes. See that answer? It says so much. It's crazy. Yeah, I was actually going to ask you because you took this idea into multi-million-dollar company and if it would be like, how would you advise young women that are thinking about doing that step, like how to start about it in the field of mobility, like how, because I always say, like, you gotta just do it, because there is no manual, but like if you could give a pointer or something that like kind of your pearls.
I would say, I think there are so many startups out there that are very promising, but might not be the holy grail. They might not be the absolute perfect solution to a problem. And I think what's really important about having the enough endurance as a founder to get to a good outcome is you have to fall in love with the problem and don't fall in love with the solution.
Yeah. It's a long journey that to be able to step out of your solution sometimes, because I see a lot of entrepreneurs and they're like so passionate and they have this glitter in their eyes when they're talking about their solution. Then you're like, oh, but what about this? And they're like, oh, no, it's okay because we can do that. Or it's kind of like being in love too much, like you said.
Yeah, you get like you just like only think about the thing that you built as the only possible solution, and you forget all the other contexts that you should be considering and designing for.
So tell me, how does it feel to sell a company for $100 million?
I think
Dale of the Sea. You signed a great contract and you walk out of that meeting room, like what goes through your body, your mind?
Well, I almost feel like I did not have the experience that I should have because it all happened over Zoom. Like,
wow, okay.
It was during COVID. It was in March 2021 of this year when, we signed the final contract or the final paperwork. And it was just so funny because, we had this call with all the lawyers and everyone was like, okay, you go through all the list of signatures that you need to get. And then, it was like, okay, everyone signed it. Great job. And then everyone just like hung up, and it was like so anticlimactic.
Wow.
I was like, wait, really? This is what I have been working all this time, and this is the end? It was just like click, and it was like the end of the Zoom call. I was just like sitting there in my seat being like, is this the moment?
Weird COVID moment.
Yeah, but obviously now I'm making up for it. Flew to New York to meet with Daniel, the CEO, who I had met in person before, but to like really meet and talk about integration. And now I'm in here in Tel Aviv meeting with Oren, who's the CTO and like leads the whole R&D team here. I feel like I'm just making up for all that lost time earlier this year. And I don't know what else to say other than it's been.
So what did you do? You closed your computer and
I closed my computer and then I was like, oh, I guess I'll go walk my dog.
Yeah, like go get some fresh air.
Yeah,
assignment done for today. Yeah, sold the company.
Yeah, it was so weird, but yeah, no, it's been a really amazing experience so far. Just like even learning about how to sell a company and like what makes a good acquirer and like why. And how, you should plan your integration processes to, do more together now that you're this bigger joint entity and all the complexities that come with that and the time zones. And I feel like I'm maybe even learning more this year than I've ever learned before.
And raising money until that point, do you feel that being a woman helped or didn't help?
So I will say I had a co-founder who was the CEO before me, Sam. He did an excellent job fundraising for us early on, and I was a part of the process, but I wasn't necessarily the singular person fundraising, by myself.
But you said in the beginning that it was hard for people understanding that you're the CEO, but then you were the COO.
I was the COO and the co-founder, and then 5 years in,
you switched.
Stepped up to be CEO. Yes, and so throughout the whole.
You did a great job. Oh. It helped the company stepping up.
We always, in our minds, I think when we started, we wanted to just see how far Remix could go, and making sure that we were solving a problem, making sure we had a good business model to support the problem that we wanted to solve, and hiring a very mission-driven team. And I think fundraising was never like, it was very hard for me after every round that we fundraised to like celebrate, even though it was the milestone. But it really, in my opinion, it should not be celebrated as much as I think venture capital world celebrates it. It's a big milestone for the VC because they're like, now I'm in this company and I, have, so much to gain from it. But for the entrepreneur, for the founder, it's just like, okay, this is just like, literally the next step. And
just beginning to work more.
Yeah, you just like have so much more that you just signed up for. And so congratulations on that. And, I see so many, articles celebrating a new funding round, but I really think that that's not the outcome. It's only a means to a much bigger outcome that you're shooting for.
So where do you see yourself in 10 years?
That's a great question. I'm really interested in cities, as you know, and I think transportation is one aspect of cities, but there's many other adjacent pieces, I think, about city government and governance that can be improved to make transportation better. What I'm really interested in, I don't know if this is like, my life's work for the next 10 years, but I'm really interested at the intersection of kind of housing and transportation and land use from, an urban design, urban planning standpoint, and, whether or not that needs to be in the form of a startup or, working for a nonprofit or working for the public sector. I think there's so many challenges right now because we as a country in the US are just terrible at linking together land use and transportation in a cohesive way to make development more sustainable. I think that will, continue to be the focus of where I decide to go next.
Yeah, I love how mobility became everything. Like insurance, real estate, energy, like all these worlds are now relevant to mobility. And everything is kind of becoming one. And I'm very excited about, I call it the musical chairs of the next years. So kind of insurance companies all of a sudden being fleet operators, OEMs, they can become energy companies, like tiers merging, and all of this big mesh, of everyone coming together in order to support this. Real estate can become, the superchargers of the future. So it's very exciting times. And I'm so happy for this conversation. And thank you so much. I hope that, going through your path will inspire more women to follow. And I just wish you a tremendous luck. I feel like we're going to, like Israel, I feel like we're going to see each other again.
We definitely will. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.